Jimmy Page spent his career setting a standard that almost nobody could reach. Led Zeppelin didn't just influence rock music, they defined what it was capable of. So when Page openly named another band as worthy of standing alongside that legacy, people stopped and listened. Because this wasn't a throwaway comment in a forgotten interview. It came from someone who had spent decades watching bands try and fail to capture what Led Zeppelin had built. The group he chose wasn't the one most people expected, and his reason for choosing them makes the answer even more surprising. Jimmy Page was born in 1944 in a suburb of West London. When his family moved to a house on Miles Road in Epsom, Surrey, they discovered an old Spanish guitar. No one ever figured out where it came from. At first, the guitar meant very little to Page. But when he finally picked it up, everything changed. At the age of 12, he learned a few basic chords from a friend at school. Before long, he had already outgrown what his friend could teach him. He taught himself by listening to records and figuring out songs by ear. Years later, Page simply admitted that he picked up the guitar because he was bored. What began as a way to pass the time quickly became an obsession. He carried his guitar to school almost every day. It didn't take long before his teachers became frustrated and regularly confiscated it. The biggest clash came with the school's deputy head, Miss Nicholson, who openly dismissed the idea that playing guitar could ever become a real career. Rather than discourage him, her attitude only pushed him further. Page did just enough to pass the minimum required exams before leaving at 15, the youngest legal leaving age in Britain at the time. Not long after leaving school, singer Neil Christian discovered the teenage guitarist and invited him to join his touring band, the Crusaders. For 2 years, Page spent countless hours traveling in cramped vans, surviving on little food while constantly battling illness. A severe case of glandular fever forced him to leave the band and return home. At the time, it felt like a crushing setback. Instead, it opened the door to something even bigger. Unable to tour, Page turned his attention to London's thriving recording scene. He became a session guitarist, recording for countless artists behind the scenes. His reputation grew at an astonishing pace. By the mid-1960s, he had become one of the busiest musicians in Britain, recording guitar parts for The Who, The Kinks, The Rolling Stones, and many others. He even contributed incidental music to the Beatles' 1964 film, A Hard Day's Night. One of his favorite early recordings came when Shirley Bassey recorded the James Bond-themed Goldfinger at Abbey Road Studios. Page was the guitarist on the session. At his busiest, he claimed he was working as many as 3 recording sessions every day, 5 days a week. Some estimates suggest he appeared on between 50 and 90% of all recordings made in Britain between 1963 and 1965. Eventually, the endless routine became too much. The breaking point came when someone asked him to record music for an elevator. Elevator music was not why he had devoted his life to the guitar. That assignment convinced him it was time to move on. In 1966, Page finally accepted an offer to become a member of the Yardbirds. The band had already built a legendary reputation and had previously featured Eric Clapton as its lead guitarist. For a brief period, Page shared the stage with another guitar giant, Jeff Beck, creating one of rock music's most memorable lineups. Around the same time, another idea was taking shape. Page had jammed with Jeff Beck, John Entwistle, and Keith Moon in hopes of forming an entirely new supergroup. The project never got off the ground, but it left behind something unforgettable. Keith Moon jokingly suggested calling the band Led Zeppelin after Entwistle joked that the project would go down like a lead balloon. Later, manager Peter Grant recommended dropping the A so people wouldn't pronounce it as lead. The name became Led Zeppelin. By 1968, the Yardbirds had completely fallen apart, leaving Page as the last remaining member. The band still had contractual obligations to perform several shows in Scandinavia. With little time to prepare, Page quickly assembled a new lineup. He recruited fellow session musician John Paul Jones on bass, then added singer Robert Plant and drummer John Bonham. The chemistry was obvious from the very beginning. Those performances convinced Page he had found something special. He wasted no time bringing the band into the studio, paying for the recording sessions himself using money he had earned during his years as a session musician. The band's debut album was completed in just 36 hours. The gamble paid off almost immediately. After hearing the finished record, Atlantic Records offered Led Zeppelin what was then one of the largest recording contracts in history, a $143,000 advance worth roughly $1.25 million today, while giving the band remarkable creative control over their music, artwork, touring, and future releases. Perhaps even more remarkable was the fact that Atlantic committed to the deal without ever seeing the band perform live. Behind the scenes, manager Peter Grant quickly earned a reputation as one of the toughest men in the music business. A former wrestler and nightclub bouncer, Grant used his intimidating presence to defend the band's financial interests and confront promoters or bootleggers who tried to take advantage of them. His aggressive approach changed how many concert promoters dealt with artists. Still, even Grant couldn't solve every problem. In 1970, Led Zeppelin faced legal action in Denmark from Countess Eva von Zeppelin, who objected to the band using her family name. To avoid the dispute, the group performed one Copenhagen concert under the temporary name The Knobs. Led Zeppelin's image became just as influential as its music. Jimmy Page's famous dragon suit became one of rock's most recognizable stage outfits, while the band's bold style helped shape the look of hard rock throughout the 1970s. Offstage, however, the band's reputation became increasingly notorious. Stories of destroyed hotel rooms, private jets, heavy partying, and lifetime bans from hotels became part of Led Zeppelin's growing legend. Looking back today, some behavior that was once dismissed as part of the rock and roll lifestyle is now viewed very differently. A reckoning that has only intensified in the 2020s as the music industry continues confronting its history of exploitation, most recently with documentaries examining the dark side of groupie culture and the abuse of underage fans in the classic rock era. By Jimmy Page's own admission, much of Led Zeppelin's 1973 North American tour became little more than a blur. Things became even more serious by 1975 when he developed a heroin addiction that would last for roughly 7 years. His once flawless guitar playing became less consistent. His weight dropped dramatically. During the making of In Through the Outdoor in 1978, John Paul Jones stepped in to carry much of the creative workload. Although Page managed to overcome his addiction in the early 1980s, his legal troubles were not over. He was arrested twice for drug possession, first in 1982 and again in 1984. Only a week before Led Zeppelin's 1975 North American tour began, Page accidentally slammed his left ring finger in a train door, badly fracturing the tip of the bone. Rather than postpone the tour, he redesigned his playing technique, relying on what he later called his 3.5-finger approach to get through each performance. To cope with the pain, Page relied heavily on codeine and Jack Daniels throughout the tour. Led Zeppelin's concerts became legendary for another reason. A typical performance could stretch close to 4 hours, with songs expanding into long improvisational journeys. No song captured that spirit better than Dazed and Confused. Even shorter versions often lasted around 20 minutes, while one famous performance at the Los Angeles Forum in 1975 stretched to an astonishing 43 minutes. Those marathon performances gave Page the perfect stage to experiment. One of his signature moments came when he picked up a violin bow and ran it across the strings of his electric guitar. Combined with distortion and echo effects, the technique produced eerie, haunting sounds unlike anything audiences had heard before. On September 24, 1980, drummer John Bonham was picked up by an assistant to head to rehearsals for the band's upcoming tour. Before leaving, Bonham drank 4 quadruple vodkas alongside a single ham roll. As rehearsals continued throughout the day, Bonham kept drinking heavily. The following morning brought devastating news. Bonham had died during the night after choking on his own vomit while asleep at Page's house. The loss sent shockwaves through the band. Led Zeppelin immediately canceled the planned tour, but it quickly became clear that postponing concerts wasn't enough. Without Bonham, the group felt they could no longer continue. Soon afterward, they made the difficult decision to bring Led Zeppelin to an end. For Jimmy Page, the tragedy was deeply personal. The guitar that had defined his life remained untouched for nearly 2 years, a powerful symbol of just how deeply grief had consumed him. Eventually, Page began searching for a way back through music. He joined forces with Paul Rodgers, the powerful vocalist best known for Bad Company, to form a new band called The Firm. Although the project was relatively short-lived, Page later credited it with helping him rebuild both his confidence and his career. In 1994, Page and Robert Plant reunited for MTV's Unplugged series, releasing the project under the title Unleaded. The album blended acoustic arrangements with Middle Eastern influences. Fans embraced it. The success led directly to a major world tour, but John Paul Jones was never invited to participate and, according to him, was not even informed that the reunion was taking place. When Led Zeppelin was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1995, Jones delivered a line that instantly became one of the ceremony's most memorable moments, thanking his friends for finally remembering his phone number. The remark revealed genuine hurt beneath the humor. In 1999, Page joined forces with American rock band The Black Crowes for a highly praised tour and live album. Everything appeared to be going well until he suddenly left before the tour had finished. According to Page, he had suggested writing new music with brothers Chris and Rich Robinson, the band's principal songwriters. The idea was reportedly rejected, and Page felt deeply insulted by the response. Rather than continue, he chose to leave the tour altogether. Despite that abrupt ending, Page later described the collaboration as an experience that rekindled the excitement he had felt while creating Led Zeppelin's earliest material. The Black Crowes' respect for Page's catalog was obvious long before he stepped on stage with them. Performances of songs like In My Time of Dying and 10 Years Gone captured the spirit and energy that had made those classics so memorable, while still allowing the band to perform them in their own voice. That was exactly what Page wanted. The goal was never to create a new version of Led Zeppelin or to relive the past exactly as it happened. Instead, he simply wanted to experience those songs again through musicians who genuinely understood them. This brings us to the answer that surprised so many. When asked directly which band he considered worthy of standing alongside Led Zeppelin's legacy, Page didn't hesitate. He named the Black Crowes. Not because they were the biggest band, not because they sold the most records, but because they understood something that most bands never grasped. They took the blues-based foundation that Led Zeppelin had built and pushed it forward with their own identity. They never tried to be a cover band. They never tried to be a tribute act. They simply played the music the way it was meant to be played, with reverence, with swagger, and with the kind of loose, improvisational energy that Page had been chasing since his earliest days in the studio. For Jimmy Page, the greatest compliment you could pay to rock and roll was not to copy it, but to carry it forward. And in his eyes, the Black Crowes did exactly that. If this deep dive into rock history gave you a new perspective, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories that go beyond the headlines. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. We'll see you in the next one.